You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. The Trump administration's federal cuts have put billions of dollars for scientific research and thousands of research jobs at risk. They could also be imperiling laboratory animals. Scientists around the country are concerned that funding cuts could mean prematurely ending a lot of research involving mice, dogs, nonhuman primates, and more. The University of Washington is a research institution that, like many others, relies on animal subjects for its studies. For instance, it houses the Washington National Primate Research Center, which is funded by National Institutes of Health Studies and holds hundreds of animals. My next guest says if these studies are unable to continue, scientists will have to consider euthanizing these animals. That could mean setbacks to all sorts of health-related experiments, including ones related to cancer and Alzheimer's, among many others. There is a lot to unpack here, and Sally Thompson-Iritani is here to help me with that. She is the Assistant Vice Provost for Animal Care, Outreach, and 3 R's, which are Reduction, Refinement, and Replacement, in the Office of Research at the University of Washington. Sally, thank you very much for being here in studio.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So I want to get to those 3 R's in just a second. But first off, let's talk about the strong feelings that people have about animal research. A lot of people have objections to using animals at all. Some have raised concerns about the University of Washington in particular. And it's a difficult topic. We're not going to get to the bottom of all of that today during this conversation. But in order to get into this and talk about the risks to the research and the data that's involved here, can you just talk about why the University of Washington and scientists in general use animals for testing purposes?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. And maybe it might be important for me to give you a little bit of background on me. I am trained as both a veterinarian and a scientist. So I did my veterinary training specifically to make sure that I could be in a role where I could care for animals that support biomedical research. So I think that's critically important that people kind of know where I'm coming from in emphasizing this important work. One of the things is that we really need these complex biological systems in order to answer questions about both human and animal health. What I commonly say is we don't know what we don't know. And in order to assess what we don't know, we need to have access to these really important animal models. This is so important in several different diseases, but the biggest things is it's important in not only looking at potential therapeutics, but we also want to be looking at how do we prevent disease? How do we, treat disease? How do we cure disease? All of these things critically important, but without the building blocks of foundational research to inform that, we aren't going to get that information. And right now, we cannot simulate the whole body system of a complex organism in vitro. Hopefully we'll get there someday. We're just not there yet.
So right now, we've talked a little bit already. I mentioned funding cuts to research that the federal government has been pursuing under the Trump administration 2.0. Can you give us a sense of the types of funding that has either been cut already or imperiled and how it may affect the animal research that's going on?
Yeah, well, the types of funding are really broad, and it covers so many different areas because you're looking both at specific grants that support research in different areas, including, infectious diseases, cardiovascular health, diabetes, all of these diseases that are so critically important to all of our health and the health of our loved ones. These are currently not being funded at the rate that they have been previously. And the other thing that seems incredibly challenging right now is we can't get good information about whether certain things are going to get funded, when they're going to get funded, and how we can sustain that. So
uncertainty.
Right. And the university then is in this particularly fragile position of figuring out, how do we keep the university enterprise supported with all of this risk associated with it. So that's really some of the biggest challenge right now.
And so what types of research could stop at UW, or what types of research could be cut short because of these funding challenges?
All of it. I don't even know how to get more specific than that, but I just looked across our research portfolio. We do everything in terms of several of our chronic diseases, like I say, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, infectious diseases we talked about. Even again, one of the things which I think is so critically important is just understanding our normal biological health, and a big emphasis now on nutrition. How do we know so much about nutrition? We know so much about nutrition because we have relied a lot on animal models, understanding what that looks like, understanding what gut health looks like, understanding what our microbiomes in our gut, like I drink probiotic sodas, love them, and I think they make me feel better. And we know from a lot of the science that's going on, both at the University of Washington and other places, how important that gut health is to our mental health and how those interactions are so critical in keeping us healthy. So that is all at risk.
What does it mean for the animals that are the test subjects that are providing information for this research? What could it mean for those animals?
What it could mean is that we are not able to not only not do the research, but we're not able to take care of these animals. Because as the research money gets cut, this is what supports us being able to take care of those animals every day. These animals do not take a break, right? We cannot say, oh, we don't have the money to fund their study today, so you need to take a break and we'll come back to this. They need to be fed, they need to be watered, they need to be checked on, they need to be cared for every single day, 365 days a year. This does not take a pause. And if that cannot happen, if we cannot take care of these animals the way that we have promised that we will do, then we will have to euthanize animals. And that is frightening all of us because that is a serious decision to make, right? We would look at trying to rehome the animals. We would look at every alternative, but there's just not the capacity to rehome all of these animals or to move animals to sanctuaries. We don't have the capacity within our infrastructure right now in the United States to do that.
There's already been animal euthanasia related to federal cuts at labs around the country in different places. How big of a risk is that right now here at the University of Washington? And what are you thinking looking around at these other places where they have had to, for example, euthanize 300 mice in one instance? How does that make you feel and how big of a risk is it right now at UW?
It breaks my heart in every possible way because particularly, and I will continue to articulate to everyone, like the absolute worst thing to happen is to have the animals started on a study and then it stops in the middle. So not only were we not able to honor what we promised we would do with that information and with those animals, but then we have to euthanize them. We collect no data. We cannot take care of the animals. That is the ultimate crisis in my mind. We have an obligation to make sure that we take good care of these animals and that we collect the data and we at least finish out that study. Even if we can't start another one, we have to finish what we started. That is just, like I say, that's unconscionable to not finish what we started. As far as the risk across our country is incredibly great. Like you say, it has already happened at places. We are assessing it here at the University of Washington, when and how we would have to make those decisions. Like what those decisions, what criteria we will use to make those decisions. All of that we are putting in place what we kind of call contingency plans that include everything from A to Z, literally, depending on what happens. If a study gets stopped in the middle, we're also trying to really assess what we start right now. So we're not starting important studies that could be leading to critical treatments. And we don't know when we're going to need those. You and I don't know if those would have been something we're going to need in 6 months, and we don't have access because those studies got stopped, right? So this is critical crisis moment. The other thing is that if we have to take a pause, restart, we have built this industry, this structure, this important work that we do over decades. You can't just stop and restart something like that overnight. Right?
I think that's a really important thing to lean on right now and just delve into. There are animal lines that are developed over time. There are preparations. And as you say, these are living things. You cannot set them aside like beakers and, Bunsen burners. This is my knowledge of what research equipment looks like. But these are living things that, need care, as you say. They can't be set aside. You told the Washington Post in April that you were not at the point of euthanasia at UW yet. And is that still the case, that this is not an imminent thing that's going to happen tomorrow, but the risk is real? In what kind of a time frame are we talking about?
As of today, that is an accurate statement. I can't say for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I honestly can't. I don't know what message we're going to get tomorrow that could change that. And so I am very concerned because if we get a message tomorrow, all our funding is cut, we have to make some serious decisions.
And for you, that idea of losing research in the middle, like having a study that's up and running, but then is shut down, and you've lost that data, you've lost that ability to, look into what you were planning on looking into, that is something that's a very real risk right now. And I think for anybody who, has complicated feelings about animal testing, the fact that you would see animals being tested and in some cases suffering, but the data that was supposed to be drawn from those studies needs to be thrown away because, the research is cut short, that can't be a good outcome no matter what your position here is on animal testing. I mean, can you reflect on that?
Yeah, I do. That is a loss of knowledge that we cannot regain, right? We cannot regain those moments when we make that decision that study is stopped that day. That is something that is lost forever. And I think even, like I say, if you do have complicated feelings, which I totally relate to, we all have complicated feelings about the role of animals in research. So I think at least something that I think can help people deal with those feelings is understanding that important biomedical research outcomes that come from those studies. And now I'm going to tell them that we can't attain those because we had to stop in the middle, right? And for the people taking care of those animals, that's what keeps them coming to work every day, right? So for them getting that news is devastating. Like, we are really having to help support people who are so afraid of this. They've been taking care of these animals. They know how important this research is. That's what gets them there every day, to take care of these animals. And we're going to tell them this is going to stop in the middle. It's something I never envisioned.
Yeah. The Non-Human Primate Center we mentioned earlier is likely the most high-profile example of animal research at the University of Washington. What other animals are at risk? We talked about, there are hundreds of primates in this center. Give us a sense of how many animals are we talking about across the different research studies at the University of Washington?
Yeah, we have a very, very large animal care program, and we actually have an open access website. Anybody can look at it to see the number of animals that are used to support our animal research and care program over the year. And honestly, the majority of these animals are mice and zebrafish. They're amazing models because of the genetic manipulations we can do with these animals and the really incredible information that we've been able to gain from doing those studies. Like, it's phenomenal. But we also do have rats and guinea pigs, ferrets. We've had dogs, we've had pigs, we have various, really a full spectrum of species. I do want to mention, particularly with the larger species, including the non-human primates, these are long-lived species, right? These are long-lived animals that we are taking care of. And we have a breeding program just for the specific need of having these animals available when they are critically necessary, and only when necessary. I do emphasize that non-human primates are only used when necessary, and other methods will not answer the scientific question that needs to be addressed. But the fact that these are long-lived animals, we have a commitment to taking care of them. So, this is not, some of the mice, they're relatively, those experiments are a lot quicker. And as zebrafish, those experiments are quicker. But for these larger animals with longer lifespans, we have a responsibility to these animals to take care of them and to make sure that we have the resources available to continue their care.
And just to be clear, if research was all stopped tomorrow, the majority of these animals, what happens to them? I mean, would they be euthanized?
That is currently what we anticipate, because even with these, when we're talking about animals, we would need sanctuaries for the animals to go to. But we don't have the sanctuary infrastructure. We're not going to send them to a sanctuary that cannot provide the care that we provide for these animals. And we do not currently have sanctuaries that can do that.
Let's talk about the alternatives that are being developed right now for animal research. The NIH recently announced an initiative to accelerate the development of animal-free research models. There are instances where models of human organs are being developed in order to replicate, what would happen in a research setting. Where does this technology stand now? I mean, is this something that can replace live animal research?
It can complement live animal research, and that's spectacular. Like, it is so exciting. The breakthroughs, the scientific breakthroughs, and the tools that we have available to us and the way they have expanded, like, it is so exciting. And I personally am just thrilled to see these things being developed. And they are very, very good complements. And they are something that we need to continue to develop, but we cannot replace a whole living organism right now with these systems. And even with the AI needs information to make decisions and to provide us with good data. The way we get at that information is by doing these studies and getting the data out there and making it available. Again, stopping a study in the middle, that data doesn't go into an AI system that can then use that data to make really important, informed decisions.
Yeah. So maybe someday, but not right now. Exactly. There is not an alternative to what kind of research, what kind of data is gained from a whole living system, a whole animal.
Correct. And I think some people don't realize that scientists are using these every day. Scientists who rely on animal models also rely on these complementary methods every day to help inform their animal models. It's like I say, it's very intertwined, as it should be. And I think that those are the conversations we need to be having too. How do we continue to intertwine these, help these work together, help to advance human and animal health?
So back in April, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said in a statement to the Washington Post, they were asking about the risks for animals of euthanasia because of the funding cuts, that HHS encourages research facilities to explore humane alternatives such as adoption rather than euthanasia. Some others have suggested making existing primate sanctuaries become new homes for lab animals. We've touched on this, but this is not a realistic solution from what you've been saying.
It's not realistic. I support those things, right? And if you don't mind, I do have a personal story with adoption, and we do adopt out a lot of animals of all of our species. And I love this story because it means a lot to me. It was back in the 90s. My husband and I were actually able to do the first legal adoption of a research dog from the University of Washington. And he was our first baby and forever has a place in our hearts. And so we 100% support adoption. And I do because also, of my personal experience and the experience of seeing when we adopt out animals and they go to these homes, they enrich the homes and enrich the animals. I mean, it's absolutely spectacular when we can rehome an animal. We can't do that with everybody. And we can't do that with all the animals. And the other thing I will just say in regards to data collection, sometimes we do need to collect the tissues from these animals at the end of the study, again, to inform the decisions, to inform the science. And when we need to collect that, that's data that we need to have. And that's really important, as we talked about, in order that data is all important as we try to advance these other methods also.
If funding continues to be lessened the way it has been right now, or it's cut entirely, what are the long-term consequences to human health and potentially our ability to make kind of advancements in medical research? I mean, can you give, just as we're heading out here, can you give some specific examples of the type of research that would be hindered and the impact on all of our health?
Yeah, boy, it's the list is long, right? Yeah. And as we're trying to understand, again, chronic diseases, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, we have not figured those out, right? And we're all going to face it as we, get older. Heart disease, again, nutrition, all of those things at risk. So what scares me and what keeps me up at night, we all rely on a lot of medicines every day. And understanding and continuing to understand, like one of the things I think we should be concerned about is antibiotic resistance, right? Like there's people trying to come up with really creative ways so we don't rely so heavily on antibiotics. Because as we get antibiotic resistance, we're no longer going to be able to have antibiotics that are going to help some of these really critical diseases and sepsis and all this, and we're not going to have an alternative. Right? So those are some of the things that really keep me up at night. There's still so much we don't know. And we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's coming down the pike, right? In terms of the next, potential threat to our society, whether it's a pandemic, whether, whatever it is, whether it's environment, we just don't know. And if we do not have the capacity to respond because we've decided that we're not going to rely on these important tools that we have available, the biomedical research that we have available, I think we're putting all of that at risk.
Sally Thompson-Iritani is Assistant Vice Provost in the Research Office at the University of Washington, and her full title is Assistant Vice Provost for Animal Care, Outreach, and the 3 Rs. which is reduction, refinement, and replacement. That's in the Office of Research at the University of Washington. And thank you so much for being in studio and talking about these really complex issues and the risks right now because of these funding cuts. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.